So I'm always wary of a model where someone says, hey, there's a problem, government, you got to fix it. What I'm saying, that's communism.
People look to you for the answers for problems that you may not have the answer to.
Yeah.
How do you make rational decision with so much pressure and without having the
Well,
answer?
it's probably one of the best questions anyone's ever asked me, because there is sometimes problems that people give you that are beyond your capacity. Days when I'm like, what am I doing? You know what I mean? Am I even doing a good job? You doubt yourself. There's no doubt. We do so many things because of our image of ourselves, and we want to build that image up as opposed to just focusing on the moment for the benefit of goodness.
Welcome to the Leaders Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Pirong, and I interview CEOs, athletes, mayors, leaders amongst...
How many mayors have you interviewed?
2. Mayor Fort Lauderdale.
Okay, you got your Dean Trentalis?
Yeah.
Good guy. Okay.
And you may ask, what is the point of all this? So that I could ask
Great question.
questions. That is a great question. What is the point of all of it, right? To ask them questions they've never been asked, so you can learn something you have never learned. Interesting, right? But look, today, I don't think the man needs an introduction. You saw it in the thumbnail, you saw it in the title. But just to put it out there, right? The mayor of, I would agree, the number 1 city in the world. Okay?
There we go. Let's go.
Number 1 city, we're going to put it out there like that.
All right.
Number 1 city in the
that.
world, home to 500,000 people, right?
Yeah, I think more, but yeah, sure. Let's
put
go
it-
with 500,000.
500,000, okay? Best athletes, best hospitality, best building, everything the best. I'm talking about no other than the mayor of Miami, Francis Suarez.
Thank you, man.
Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
I know your dad was the mayor.
He was.
Before you. And I think there's a tendency, right? When your parents have achieved a certain level of success, they look at you and they hope that you achieve more than that.
Yeah.
Right? And I know some people will say, well, if the vice versa, some people say, well, look, if I wasn't born in a certain situation, if I wasn't born with my dad as a mayor, I can't be mayor, right? And they use that excuse.
Sure.
By asking you, what do you think propelled your success to be where you're at today?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think it starts with thinking about his life, right? Like he came to this country at 12 years old. He was exiled from his country of birth.
From Cuba?
From Cuba.
Okay.
Where a leader there said, give me all your property, give me all your businesses, and don't worry, we'll make everybody equal. And he did. He made everybody equally poor and equally miserable. And, that is where his journey began. He's the 9th of 14 kids, came to this country with nothing, studied, very Catholic family, my grandfather's family. My grandfather was an academician. He was an engineer. And my dad got a scholarship to a very good prep school, went to school for free. Did very well in school, got a presidential scholarship to Villanova University. They give 1 or 2 a year.
That's an amazing school.
Yeah, great school. Presidential scholarship, free tuition, room and board. He earned that. Graduated SUMA, so he graduated with almost a 4.0 in mechanical engineering, got 2 graduate degrees from Harvard, and a master's in public policy from the Kennedy School, and a law degree from the law school. So he comes down to Miami, and he runs for office in 1979. I was 2 years old for the first time. He runs for commissioner. He loses. Okay. He runs again in 1981 for commissioner. He loses again. For some reason, in 1983, he decides, I'm going to run for mayor. I guess he couldn't take a hint, right? So he runs in 1983, and he loses a third time. By the way, this time by a very small margin to the incumbent mayor who had been mayor for 10 years.
So he lost 2 times as going for commission and 1 time as mayor.
2 times for commissioner, 1 time as mayor. He runs a 4th time. By this time, people were like, what's wrong with this guy? You know what I mean? He really can't take a hint, And he was running against a popular incumbent who was the first Hispanic mayor of Miami, a Puerto Rican named Maurice Ferre, who we all came to love and adore over time, even though he was sort of a political rival of my dad in the 80s. And he was the first Cuban mayor elected in 1985. He was elected in 85, reelected in 87 and 89. And it's a long-winded way of answering your question, but I wanted to give you context, right? For me, growing up as his son, you're growing up as a son of a Harvard-educated lawyer who was the first Cuban mayor of Miami.
A lot of
those
pressure.
are big shoes to fill, right? And, I think it wasn't until my dad, in my opinion, was unfairly criticized in the late 90s when he came back into politics after serving those 8 years, that I really started to have a distaste for politics, right? I saw him do well in those 8 years as mayor, and then, he was, in my opinion, unfairly criticized in 1997. He was ousted from office when a court overturned an election where he was victorious, and he was criticized by the local newspaper, and I just found it to be very distasteful. I'm like, a guy that I see fully committed to the public sector, a guy that has come from nothing, who has achieved, the most prestigious educational.
That's interesting that you say that. Sorry to cut you off.
No,
because
go ahead.
I guess your beginning motivation, right, was that you had a different insight from your dad. You saw that he came from a different country. You saw the work that he put in. You saw him the late hours at home.
Totally.
And that gave you that little bit of a motivation to, you know what? Like, people don't really understand the full story. It's interesting that you.
Yeah, there's there's a saying that I often repeat from the churches. They say that they see the glory, but they don't know the full story, right? They don't know the real story.
Never heard that.
So, but in his case, I was always motivated, like you said, by the positive aspects of his job, the ability to help people, the ability to transform your city, the ability to do something that you're passionate about that is a sacrifice, right? He had to make a lot of sacrifices as a public official. But then I also saw the other side of it, the unfair criticism, the demonization, the haters, the people who make a living trying to take you down. And I was disgusted by that, to be honest with you. And I was a young guy. I was in my 20s, and I didn't know if I really wanted to get involved in politics. And I had a lot of people that came before me, even in my generation. My cousin-in-law was a state representative, Marcelo Llorente. He was a year or two older than I am, and he sort of paved the way in my generation. And there were people that I looked to as role models, and so I almost reluctantly and begrudgingly decided to serve. I was 30 years old when I decided to run for office the first time. I was married. Okay. Had a small business. I didn't have kids. So I had the ability to serve, to give back. And I really felt, after 30 years of living in the city of Miami and being the son of the mayor, that I had an obligation, frankly, to give back. Okay. I felt a sense of obligation. When I was elected, I won by a very small margin. People often focus on my mayoral elections where I won by a large margin, 85 and 80%. But I was actually elected by 260 votes in my first election. So it was 51.5% against 48.5%. Very, very, very narrow election. Yeah. And our city was bankrupt. So I inherited a bankrupt city. Yeah. We had to make some really tough choices to turn it around. And today we have the best bond rating in history, the most reserves in history. We grew 14% and we reduced taxes to the lowest level in history. So it's just a beautiful story of turning around a city.
And also I know you mentioned on the podcast when the GDP for homicide, that also went down. A lot of statistics that have been like, you see the improvement.
The homicide one is a great one, and I'm sorry to jump in on that because I think it's really important to mention to your viewers, right? In the 1980s, when the worst moments of our city, where Time Magazine had us as Paradise Lost, right?
That's what they.
That was the cover of Time Magazine, Paradise Lost. We had 220 murders in 1980. Today, if we were to end the year today, we would have the lowest murder rate in history, in our recorded history. We started recording homicides in 1947. We have 24. So it's 90% less than we had in 1980. Yeah, huge difference.
Kind of going back to the relationship with your father.
Yeah,
was it a tough love type of relationship?
My dad is a tough guy. His generation is not like a touchy-feely,
because Cubans are very tough. They're very a tough love.
Yeah, look, and my grandfather was that way too, with him. In his case, it was even harder because he was the 9th of 14 kids. So to fight with 13 other kids for the affection of your parents is always tough. Yeah. But, my dad is a loving dad. He's very loving. Again, not like effusively, but very loving guy. I never doubted his love for me. I'm lucky because I'm the only son, so I got 3 sisters, so that helped. But he was a tough guy. He's a tough guy. He's a guy that has very high standards. He has very high expectations, and I know that when he compliments me, or if I make him proud, it's an achievement because it's not easy. Like, it's not like, so he doesn't give it away.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have the same relationship with my father. He's very tough. He's been very tough at 14. And the thing is that you never understand in the moment why they're being tough, but it's only till you grow up and you start realizing.
Yeah, I've always felt like, exactly, if I could make it, and I always used to tell his employees, if you can make it as his employee, like, you can make it anywhere, because he's a tough boss.
That's interesting. So I watched a Nook podcast, good podcast. I like
Cool.
what you're talking about. One thing that really stood out to me is there was a segment that you guys were talking about mental health.
Yeah. Huge.
Something that I've never heard before. You talked about emotional calluses.
Yeah.
And when you said that, I was like, that's interesting. Like, just so you guys can understand, I don't know if they don't know what calluses are, but calluses are from when you work out. They're getting there. They're getting there.
My calluses. I'm working on.
You probably got more calluses than me, but you know.
Yeah.
But so calluses are built when you work out a lot, and
Yeah.
they're meant to protect you from the next time you work. They're like
Yeah.
a little, like a shield on your hand,
Yeah.
right, to protect you from getting hurt. Emotional calluses to build your mental toughness. How do you develop emotional calluses?
Wow, that we could do a whole podcast just on that. And I don't by any stretch of the imagination I won't tell you guys that I have all the answers at all. I think you do it in a variety of ways. I think I'm a huge person of faith, so I think your spirituality is very important because it gives you purpose, right? It helps you have purpose. Like, what am I doing here? Why am I here? What's my mission? What's my goal? That's one. I think trying to build and gain self-confidence. I mean, many people might think, oh, this guy's the mayor. He's been the mayor and he's been a public official for 14 years. This guy must be super confident. No, I mean, there are days when I have a lot of confidence.
So you missed the mark some days where you
There are days when I'm like, what am I doing? You know what I mean? Am I even doing a good job, right? You doubt yourself. There's no doubt. And then the critics, they start seeping in and they get in your head and like, hey, maybe he's right. Maybe this person's right. Maybe I shouldn't.
How do you overcome that doubt?
I think you go back to the fundamentals. I'm very blessed. I've been married for 16 years. I have an amazing wife. I have a great support system. My parents have been married my whole life. Her parents have been married her whole life. We have siblings who are all married and all been married, first marriages. So I have a great support system. It's very unusual, I think, in today's modern day. And I'm very blessed that, I have great friends since I was a kid. So I have a lot to lean on. But I think, I have this other saying about spiritual gas tank. We wake up every day and you have a spiritual gas tank, like our gas tank in our car. And I think, purpose is part of that, but inspiration is another part, right? Like, how do you fill that gas tank? You fill it, and sometimes with inspiration. So I do listen to podcasts or, people on social media that I find inspiring, Patrick and others, you know what I mean? David Goggins, there's a lot of people, that I think are inspiring, that are constantly pushing you. But I think it's also, people often will ask me, how do you become a good public speaker? And there's a lot of tricks, there's a lot of techniques, but the most important thing is to do it a lot. And so, as I enter my 15th year, I'm literally entering my 15th year in public service. I feel like a quarterback who's in his 15th year. I've taken a lot of hits.
Yeah.
You get hit a lot, right?
Yeah.
As a quarterback.
Yeah.
And, part of becoming tough is getting hit and going inside yourself to rediscover who you are. And then frankly, you should reflect on the criticisms at some level.
That's interesting that you say that.
Yeah, I mean, you should use it as a tool for improvement.
Yeah.
I don't think that, you can't just block yourself off and say, oh, the critics are all wrong. I'm right. I'm perfect. I do everything right. No, on the contrary, I do make mistakes. I am a human being. I'm flawed. And I'm trying to get better. I'm trying to learn every day, and I do absorb some of the criticism, and I do use some of the criticism, particularly if I think it's in good faith. If I think somebody is being critical of me in good faith, if I don't think they're being paid, or if I don't think that they're, they just have a different philosophy than me and they just don't like me, which is okay. I mean, you don't have to.
And I think both are good. I think it was something that Patrick David said. He said, he said, choose your enemies wisely, but more importantly, keep the people that criticize you the most, keep them close because they're pointing you out what's wrong with you. So they say, you suck as a man. You keep saying this.
Yeah.
Okay. You said that. All right. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to fix it. I'm going to double down on improving on that.
No, there's definitely, yes, I would agree with that. I think there are criticism in good faith is always constructive, and I take it that way. And I engage with people, and it's hard because you don't always know where they're coming from, and it's hard because sometimes you engage with somebody you think is acting in good faith, and they're clearly not because all they're trying to do is take you down a rabbit hole. But I do think you're right. I think that even when you do well on something, there's I hate to say this, but there's a yin to every yang, right? Like every time you do well, when we're doing well
There's
on,
always something.
yeah, when we're doing well, for example, on growth and homicides, you're creating a very attractive city. So what happens when you have attractive city? Demand. What happens when you have demand? Prices go up, right? Because people want to be here, and you have an imbalance between demand and supply. So prices will go up. Real estate prices will go up. If you own property, that's a good thing. If you're a renter, it's not such a good thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So then people will be upset.
What are some on that topic? Because I think as a leader, you have to make people look to you for the answers for problems that you may not have the answer to.
Yeah.
Right? Something may happen, an event, God forbid, something just happens, right? And they look for you. They say, well, Mayor, like, what's the solution?
Yeah.
And you may not have it, but you as a leader, you're obligated to come up with the best answer on the spot. How do you make decisions in a rational decision with so much pressure and without having the answer?
Well, first of all, that's probably one of the best questions anyone's ever asked me, to be honest with you, because I think that really hits a tension point that most public officials don't want to admit or talk about, because there is sometimes problems that people give you that are beyond your capacity, right? And it's hard to tell somebody this is beyond my capacity, right? And I'll go back to something you said earlier in the podcast, where we talked about my dad leaving Cuba, right? My dad left Cuba because a guy said, give me all your property, give me all your businesses, and I'll make everybody equal. I have the problem. Government is the solution. Government can solve every problem. And he didn't. He just created misery for everybody. So I'm always wary of a model where someone says, hey, there's a problem, government, you got to fix it. What I'm saying, that's communism. Communism is a concept where government can fix every problem, right? In our case, I think we can create prosperity. We can help people. We can be creative. We can leverage the public sector and the private sector. There are some things that government can solve, or at least can help with, right? Like, for example, on affordable housing, we do public-private partnerships where we put in $1 and the private sector puts in $10 or $20, depending on how they finance the project. So we are part of the solution, but we're not the entirety of the solution, right? But so, there are things, I think oftentimes politicians are not honest with people. And I think oftentimes they want to do something that makes them feel good in the short run, but it creates long-term problems. So, for example, rent control. People oftentimes will say, hey, rents are up. Government should just step in and say, hey, you can't, as an owner, charge more than X in rent, right? It sounds like a smart thing to do, right? Like, let's just control it. The problem with that is the long term. It makes you feel good in the short run, like, hey, I'm government. I represent the people. I protected them. The problem with that is they don't see the long term consequences. The long term consequences are for everyone else who needs affordable housing. They get the short end of the stick, because you can't build new product because a bank won't finance it if the government has intervened and said, hey, you can't raise it by more than this percent. Or if you have an aging building, you can't recapitalize the building and renovate the building because a bank won't lend you. So what you have is decaying properties, and you have cities across America that have tens of thousands of empty units because they're out of compliance with the code. They're dangerous for people to live in. And a bank won't finance it because you have government intervening, trying to solve a problem, which ends up creating a long-term problem. So that happens as well, where you try to solve a problem in good faith. I'm not saying that people are not acting in good faith, and you have a longer-term problem.
And I think that could be something felt amongst leaders amongst every industry, right? Whatever industry you're in. That thing that you said was very powerful. Sacrificing the short-term gratification of saying, well, they're going to look at me if I make this decision right now. They say this, but knowing. And well knowing that in the long run, it's probably not going to be the best.
And in a democracy, it's tough because you get elected, right, by people. And people want to be, you want to make your residents happy. Yeah. When I first got elected in 2009, it was really tough. We were bankrupt, basically, on the verge of bankruptcy.
2000, wow, that was
bad
timing.
That wasn't my council, and we had to cut. We had a $115 million deficit. If we did nothing, we would have been bankrupt. And we had to cut our employees' salaries and their pensions. It was not easy. It was not popular, and it was not fun. And we did it. And it was, again, taking short-term pain for long-term gain. Now we have the highest, like I said, reserves, the highest bond rating, and we're also taking care of our employees. We have labor peace, right? So we're in a good place now. We grew by 14% last year. So you're able to give some of that growth in the form of, salary increases and help your employees to compensate them for times that were tough.
Interesting.
No problem.
Just to get your thought on this, okay? I was reading a book. I read a poem. I thought it was powerful, right? And it says, when I look in the mirror, what do I see? One side is everything I ever hoped to be, yet my greatest problem is staring back at me. There are times where I rush out to get ahead and leading where I need to be led. Courage is needed. How can I overcome me? It's powerful. When you slow down and you read in between the lines, it's basically saying that sometimes as a leader, you have to constantly reinvent yourself.
Yeah.
You don't have all the answers figured out.
No doubt.
And you have to look in the mirror every day and say, how can I overcome myself? Because at the end of the day, I think we're the only thing that can stop us from becoming better.
Yep.
So my question to you is, do you ever have days where you look and, damn, I should have done this better. I should have. And
100%.
How do you like?
No, I think if anybody answers that question differently than the way I just answered it, they're lying.
Okay.
I think there are many moments where you look back and you say, man, I wish I would have done this, or maybe I could have done that. That's how you learn. That's how you grow. One that comes to mind is a strong mayor. I get elected by 85%. The next year I wanted to change the system of government to give the mayor's office more authority. And I failed, like big time, right? Like I lost 65-35. And looking back on it, is there things that I could have done differently? 100%. There's a bunch of things that I could have done differently, including not doing it at all. Okay. Was one of the things that I could have done differently. So I think that's part of it. I think that, I finished reading a really cool book by Eckhart Tolle called The New Earth, and he has another one called The Power of Now. And part of it is disconnecting yourself. I think what that poem means to me is disconnecting yourself from your ego. You know what I mean? We do so many things because of our image of ourself, right? We see an image of ourself as whatever it is, and we want to build that image up, as opposed to just focusing on the moment and doing the very best that you can in that moment to get the most out of it for the benefit of goodness, which means the people, right?
That's powerful.
People that you represent. And it's an exercise. It takes time. It takes energy. But I think when you're living in the moment of now and focus on that, I think you're living the best version of yourself in many ways.
I like that. That's powerful. Cool. Well, thank you for your time. I know.
Thank you, man.
Thank you for taking the time. Truly,
great questions.
Hope you guys enjoyed it. I definitely learned a lot.
I hope they do too.
I really did learn a lot, and I hope you guys can take this and apply it to your success. Right? Take a piece of his success, apply it to your success. I learned a lot, but thank you guys so much for making it 10. Anything you wanna?
No, I want to thank you, and I want to tell your audience that I welcome your ideas and I welcome your advice. And like you said, this is a journey. Life is a journey, and you're always trying to get better. So any way that I could get better, I'm happy to hear their perspective on that.
Awesome. I
Thanks,
love
brother.
that. Thank you so much.
Thank
See you guys on the next one.